Hello my brothers and sisters of the Order, I am Templar, and welcome back to another Fantasy Friday video. And for this video today we are actually going to be talking about the double-headed axe. Now, in truth, this is actually a fantasy style weapon. And as well, many of you might start getting mad at me stating, Templar, this is not a fantasy weapon, it's real, I've seen it in movies. See my point? In truth, this is not a fantasy weapon. This is... In fact, I wouldn't even call this a good fantasy weapon because... Let's look at this thing. This thing has two-headed axe head, of which, if we think about it, the cost manufacturing of it would technically rival that of a greatsword. So why would I want to pay for this? It doesn't make any sense. Now, in truth, though, we had to understand the reasons why this isn't a good fantasy weapon, and as well, we also got to understand the fact of the manufacturing design of it. Now, first, let's go into some historical looks, shall we? Now, in truth, the double-headed axe head did exist during the Neolithic and Bronze Age culture. However, this is the Neolithic and Bronze Age. You can easily make a stone axe head of a double-bladed design, or even also the same with a bronze head. However, these were not meant for warfare. These were actually meant to be used for ritual sacrifice. In other words, say like I go to the Temple of Athena, or the Temple of Apollo, Zeus, or even Isis, or such and such. You get my point. And in truth, that's actually what it is. It's a double-headed axe head that's meant for ritual sacrifice. However, by the time of the Iron Age, or in this case the late antiquities, for example, we actually see an end of the said double-headed axe head being used for rituals and mainly used for nothing. In truth, the ritual type sacrifice weapon would either be a knife or a sword or something like that. That of which would be, well, proper for ritual sacrifice. That way the, well, body isn't destroyed. In truth, they would want to keep the entrails. They would just cut off the head. That's what it was meant to be used for. But in truth, that's my point about it. Now, though, during the early times of the early axe, most of the time for warfare, they would either have a design type axe that was, well, made out of stone, yes. However, it would be of one-headed use like this. This is a celt axe. Yes, a celt stone on the said type of structure. And in doing so, this is, well, incredibly a dangerous weapon by far, especially if it has a sharpened cut. However, this was not meant to be used for warfare. In truth, it was actually meant to be used for agricultural tool. And in doing so, this, though, was meant for warfare. In fact, this was the Egyptian axe, or the Egyptian khopesh axe, which is also known as the cheap man's khopesh, or poor man's khopesh, because it, if not, I don't understand, a khopesh actually has the weight in, does not have the weight of the said axe, but it does actually have the power behind the axe, meaning it has a good design cutting the blow for your said opponent. So in doing so, this weapon is really cool, actually. Now, in truth, though, the Egyptian axe, well, was not just used in Egypt, it was also used by many people in the parts of the Middle East. However, it was then, well, kicked away because manufacturing cost to make it in iron. And in truth, when the Bronze Age ended, the Iron Age technically took its place. Not because it was cheaper or anything, but because, well, we ran out of bronze. Now, that's actually saying something by far. Now, I hear many of you already, but Templar, isn't it true that these axes are incredibly different comparing that? Well, in truth, yes. Now, I do want to put that out there, though, is that because of the fact, if we take a look at the axe in general, what is it, you might ask? Well, in truth, the axe is an agricultural tool. It is not originally a weapon. In fact, it was only used as a weapon because of a last resort, mainly meant because it needed to be used for self-defense, especially to defend your home from a said invader. Now, in truth, I do want to put that out there for many of y'all that don't understand history, because when weapons like the axe were starting to be used, or reused again especially, we do see people using axes as nomadic cultures, especially using a type of, well, I want to say axe, that of which is used as a throwing weapon, but as well as like a light-handed type of hatchet. And in truth, that's actually because that's what they used it for. They used it for, well, everyday tools, especially if they were, say, steppe people. And in doing so, this could easily work. Now, in doing so, we could take a look at the Native Americans with their pipe axes, or also with the tomahawk, in which this was originally a agricultural tool. However, Native Americans quickly found a way to use it as a throwing weapon, especially by copying it from their French and, I want to say, Spanish conquerors, who of which did use the axe as a throwing weapon. Sometimes. Just depended. But yeah, you can see of how gruesome that would be. So, yeah, the tomahawk technically does classify as a hatchet-style axe. But in truth and general, these axes were, well, a single-headed only. And in truth, the pipe axe, if none of y'all understand what these are peace or war axes, that of which were actually supposed to symbolize both peace and war. Of which is really cool because I'm looking to buy one of these very soon, because the pipe end and the axe head is a good clarification for me that say I am neutral, but if you want to declare war on me, I will declare war on you. But yeah. Anyways. Now, if we were to actually take a look in general in history form, the hatchet is a very good type of weapon for self-defense, and in which it's only a one-handed tool weapon. Now, that does give me a good explanation to this. Now, if we take a look at utility axes, for example, and if none of y'all know what a utility axe is in the medieval times, a utility axe is something like this. It looks like it has a small axe head, and as well, the back end actually has a hammer. Now, here's the thing, I've heard many of you already. Templar, why would it have a hammer? Well, because this was meant to, the axe was meant to cut down trees, while the back end was meant to be used on a splitter, which a log splitter, for example, now I don't know what that is. During the early times, these were mostly made out of wood, but yeah. As well, these were also used to even nail nail in some items, such as, say, hammer in the nail. In truth, the axe was also a hammer. Now, also, sometimes, though, you did see some axe heads actually have a nail remover, I guess is that the good term I could call it? But, yeah, you could actually understand that. In fact, hang on one moment, let me get my hammer first. Here's a good example. Yeah, you're wondering why am I having an axe, a little hammer in my place? Well, I just brought this up here to give a good explanation because I thought this through the video, so yeah. Anyways, let's get back to it. Now, in truth, how would it be done? Well, take a look at the hammer. If we take a look at this hammer and this axe, we see that the hammer is where on the back end of the axe. So where would the nail remover go, for example? Well, in truth, it would go right on the axe blade. In fact, this archer's axe head is a good example. This is used by mainly utility people. In fact, this is a utility hatchet, and which was mainly the biggest type of utility axe at the time, instead of, well, two-handed axes. In truth, it was a one-handed weapon. This would be used to, well, split logs in your little, technically you would, well, split the logs with the axe blade, or as well cut down a small tree with it, or as well you can even use it as an edger. If y'all don't know what an edger is what they call this of which you need to use on long ships or something like that. But I'll get to the Vikings very soon. Now, in truth, this axe actually is a very good example for the late medieval time period, because these were actually used not during the medieval period, but even in the colonial times and even all the way into the modern industrial revolution. especially somewhere during the time of the late 1800s, and of which were still being used. In fact, many Amish folk actually do use these. So yeah, it's actually really cool. And as you can see, it does have that nail remover, which is really awesome. Now, I hear many of you already. Templar, how good of this is a weapon for warfare? In truth, it is a really good weapon for warfare. In fact, it's actually been stated that archers actually carried these a lot more than anyone else, in which they did use them for making their arrows, especially, and as well their bows, especially if, say, if their bow broke, for example, or something like that. So yeah, it's a really good tool. Now, also, if we take a look at that, we can actually understand its evolutionary trait from its original source. For example, let's take a look at the Germanic warrior. Now, why do I say the Germanic? Well, in truth, the Germanic people did use axes, especially. Now, in truth, the Germanic people are parts of Scandinavia, or also Germania, or anywhere that's across the Rhine River for the ancient Romans. So I'm just putting that out there for you all so that way you can understand, because this way it's a lot easier for me to explain. Now, in truth, these axes that the, well, barbarian Germanic people used were not double-headed. They were not, well, this idiotic form of a, well, I want to say stupidity, because here's the thing. No one in their right mind would probably ever use a double-headed axe. Now, in truth, take a look at this. This is known as the long-bearded axe, or the bearded axe as people call it. Now, these were actually used for edging a ship. In truth, if you all don't know what an edging means for shipbuilding, here's the thing. Many Vikings would actually use this to actually edge out the planks for their ship, for their longboats, especially for the Vikings. Now, that gives us a good example, because they would use this a very effective way. In fact, I'll leave a link down below for y'all for Warriors with Terry Shepard, which I love that show, because it actually gets a little more accurate from the warriors of history. And in truth, he actually is informed on how he's supposed to use it in the said edging of a ship. In truth, Terry Shepard, if you're watching this, dude, I love you. Not just because you're a Green Beret, but because you got something great and accurate compared to some shows out there. What? I just had to say it. Anyways, let's just get on from it. Now, many of you might also ask, Templar, is this the only type of axe they would have used? No, there would be several. In fact, there would be wood-cutting axes, there would be hedging axes, there would be this and that. Hell, there are a lot of axes out there. In fact, the Delabra pick axe that the Romans used is technically an axe, I want to say, but I wouldn't go that far calling it that. Since technically it was used to cut down trees sometimes, but that was a rare opportunity you ever saw. And no, they did not use this in warfare. It was kind of an idiotic idea to ever use this in warfare. I'm kind of wondering why in the show called Deadliest Warrior decided it would be a good idea to put that in that. I don't know why, but yeah, it's really stupid. But yeah, anyways, let's actually focus on another type of form. Now, in truth, we have to understand how were these utility axes manufactured from a regular household tool to a weapon of war? Well, in truth, they actually had to be manufactured that way, especially. Now, in truth, you could just take a regular utility weapon of an axe and use it for everyday killing. Especially, that's what's seen with the Vikings. They did that because, well, they used a one-handed axe mainly because they needed to cut down trees to build their ships, to build their homes. You get the point. Now, in doing so, there would be sometimes the two-handed type axes. Now, in truth, the two-handed style axe is a lot different compared to what you might understand. In fact, let me go get my Viking Axe, shall I? Alright, I'm back, and as you can see, I got my two-handed type axe. This is a Goatland Viking Axe. Now, if y'all want to see my do a review, I will leave a link down below for y'all, so that way you can understand. Now, this is a really good description of what many axes would have looked like for battlefield use. This is of the late medieval time period, or during the time of the 13 or 1400s of what the axe would technically look like by this point. Now, in general, I hear many of you already, Templar, were all of them like this? Well, no. In truth, this is a really good example because this is a cheap way to make an axe. Now, what do I mean by that? Here's the thing. If I was going to use it for battlefield use only, because this is actually a big thing, because by the time of the late medieval period, these axes would have changed. They would have evolved to something like this. They would not have a double-headed design. In truth, these axes, as you can see, it's actually surprisingly easy to use this thing, even with one hand. Now, in truth, if I was to use this, as you can see, the way they manufactured this is, they took just rails, and this is from bog iron, but this is in modern construction, but the historical model design that it's based off of is actually made from bog iron. In fact, bog iron is incredibly great for manufacturing weapons and tools like the sax or the axe itself, especially for Viking cultures. However, it also is technically a big probable design problem. However, if you manufacture this in a way, the bog iron can incredibly become a good weapon, or make a good weapon by that fact. So how would they do this? Well, as you can see, they would actually they would technically manufacture the said axe blade or the axe itself in a type of form of a cord. And this way it means like railing. In fact, railing manufacturing looks like this. In fact, what you have to do is the following. You have to hammer it in a type of form and it makes this design. And in doing so, as you can see, the design itself actually works. Like, say I start from the back end here and then I move towards here. Then I hammer it a little more to make it to design like this. Now, sometimes though they would do this, but this was very hard by the early medieval periods. And most of the time, they would just be, it would technically just be left wide open. And why would they do that? Simple, to catch a weapon. In fact, this is actually a good way to explain on how the axe would look like during the time of the late Viking period or during the early high medieval periods, or incredibly all throughout the high medieval periods, and in which these were actually extremely noticeable on the battlefield, and as well very awesome to see. Now, in truth, these axes were incredibly different, comprised from the regular household weapon. In fact, there are hundreds of axes. However, there are historical ones, then there are the very idiotic ones. Now, in truth, though, there are those type of axe heads that have a full cast of steel or iron design like this. In other words, there is no opening, it's just regular. So, in truth, that is a good example. However, there is a way you can actually understand this. Now, in truth, though, take a look at, say, the Francisca, the throwing axe used by the Franks, or in this case, the French. In doing so, this weapon, which was used as a throwing weapon, can actually bounce off the said ground. In fact, the Thane Thrand actually tried this as well, and it actually worked, which is actually really cool. Now, in truth, these were actually S-shaped because this would, in the process, cause it to bounce. Now, as well, people in the Native American region saw this and copied from it and used it for themselves. So they created the Tomahawk because of it, which is kind of actually cool. Now, though, we had to also understand the fact on why these type of weapons were manufactured and such. And in doing so, they were manufactured to, well, work this way. You don't actually see them manufacturing an idiot weapon that which doesn't work. Now, that will actually bring us to the double-headed axe. But let me actually start talking about what type of axes were seen during the colonial period and incredibly up until the industrial age. Now, in truth, during the time when America was being colonized, many times over, the axe evolved because of it. In fact, the Frontiersman Axe, as it was known as, looked like this. In fact, it looks like this big version, or messed up version, of a, I want to say, a bearded axe that the Vikings would have used, in which it just has this pointed up design. Now, in truth, it's actually been stated that Santa Anna actually used these at the Battle of the Alamo in which he actually used them to actually cut through some of the defenses, in which it did somewhat work. So yeah, in fact, these were used by frontiersmen. In fact, Frontiersman Axes, there are a dozen designs, so in truth, we kind of had to understand what they would look like, how would they and in particular feel like. In doing so, that technically would be probably only half this staff weight, so, but sometimes a little bit taller, sometimes a little bit narrower, but you can see my point. But that will bring me to my next form. And in truth, that actually brings us to the modern axes, known as the double-headed axe. Which, in truth, here's the problem. The double-headed axe is a modern invention. Literally, this is actually during the time of the Industrial Age. Now, in truth, none of y'all understand the Industrial Age, in truth. This comes around pretty much by the time of the late 1800s, some say early, depending on the region. And in truth, the double-headed axe doesn't exist at all before this time. So that actually gives us a good example on this form. Now, I heard many of you already. So, Templar, what are you saying? Are you saying that these axes had to be manufactured in a factory? Yes. Because, in truth, the double-headed axe head itself does not, I repeat, does not come from historical, medieval, or anything like that until the 1800s, in which many people didn't want to use it. Why? Kind of obvious. It's a double-headed axe head, of which you have to worry the fact of it coming right back at you, especially if you get it stuck in a wooden piece of wood, for example, or worse, in the process, well, you can't hammer a nail in. Yeah, big problem there. So, in truth, these axes were pretty much not used by woodcutters. These were only used by lumberjacks. They were only used by modern fires. However, they then switched to this modern design with the spike end, which is really cool, which that brings me to another form of medieval axes, of which those medieval axes that had spikes, those are historical, but they're very rare to see for a foot soldier to use. But in truth, though, it is stated, though, Robert the Bruce might have actually used a spike-headed axe head end to actually go through a said, well, nasal part of the, or eye-slit part of the said helm. A great helm of which he actually killed a said noble knight during the Battle of Bannockburn. And of which, yeah, it's kind of awesome. Now, in truth, though, let's get back to the double-headed axe head so that way I can prove my point about this entire idiocy. Now, we have to understand the factorial reason behind the said axe head. Now, let's go through, I want to say, fact number one. Fact number one is the cost in manufacturing. Now, what do I mean by that? Here's the thing. This cost in manufacturing, here's the thing. If I was to pay for a said double-headed axe head, I would find it a little idiotic. Why? Because if I was to do that, especially during that time, I would actually be able to pay for, say, I want to say a greatsword, for example. Because all the time in manufacturing a process that takes to make a double-headed axe head, of which it's near impossible, as I stated, you're gonna have to pretty much actually cost as much as a greatsword, in which, why would you want to do that when you could just buy a greatsword? See my point? Now, in truth, you can also actually see this other form can actually be seen in a good example that can actually also be seen with fact number two is, well, the dangers of using it. Now, what do I mean by dangers? Here's the thing. Say, for example, I have a double-headed axe head. Let's use my axe here for a good example. Say if, like, I'm using this. And say if, like, I'm going to come down for a downward chopping blow. So what am I going to have to do? I'm going to have to lift it. Like so. Just to do it like this. But here's the thing. I have to worry, especially if I'm in formation and I'm fighting with my allies. You know, here's the thing. Just imagine if this thing comes at you. Here's the thing. I have to worry about my ally in the back. Because take a look at this. I have to worry. Because just imagine if this shelf in here. Just imagine this is my allies. Just imagine, I'm coming back. Ah! I'm killing my own allies. In the process, literally, I'm killed my best friend right behind me. I just killed him. And here's the thing. What am I... Oh, I hear you already. But Templar, what if you do it from the side? Okay, let me do it from the side. Yep, he's dead. Oh, I'm gonna go to the other side. My friend is dead again. See my point? Now, here's also another reason why this is also a danger for your friends and yourself. For one, say for example, if my opponent deflects the weapon, like he uses a strapped-on shield or something like that, to just deflect it. In fact, this actually has been seen in historical manifests of history of when a noble knight accidentally got blinded by his own spike end of his axe. In fact, he had a one-handed axe and it just went right into his eyeball. Yikes. Now, in truth, this is actually what... Just imagine, if I did this, that my opponent deflects it... Yeah, we can see where this is going to go. It's not going to end well. It's probably best I had a hammer-headed end. So, yeah. Now, in truth, I want to explain that to y'all because we got to understand that the double-headed axe is an incredible myth. Now, I hear you already. But Templar, what if they manufactured it in the form, when it comes to cost, why can't they just do it like this? In truth, that's probably a good idea, but I really wouldn't advise it. Why? Well, here's the problem. This axe is not meant to be used as like a double-headed design. In truth, I could probably see it somewhat working, but in truth, that would technically, with that extra metal on this end, for the same amount of metal on this, it would be as much as a sword. So why would you want to pay for that? You could just buy a sword, damn it. You don't need to get an axe. Now, many of you might also start saying, but Templar, can you buy this type of weapon on an axe? Can you get this type of weapon? No. Now, I hear you already. But Templar, does Gimli's axe work with the double-headed? No. In fact, no one can actually lift that. Which brings me to, well, step number 3, which, or should I say rule number 3, is the weight. In fact, this is extremely heavy already. Literally. In fact, most of the point of balance is all the way towards the axe head itself. Literally, this is where most of the weight is. In other words, if I put another amount of axe head on here, it's going to be a lot harder to swing. It's going to be a lot harder to rotate for defense and movement. So in truth, I don't want to use that axe head. In fact, it will be so heavy, what would be the point? Which, why? Which brings me to rule number 4, the manufacturing of how it's supposed to be made. Now, in truth, yes, you can probably do it like this, but as I stated with the prior rules, probably not the best idea. Now, in doing so, here's the thing. The double-headed axe head would not be seen. In truth, here's the thing. The manufacturing detail on how you would actually have to manufacture, say, a full-on axe head like this with double-headed design. Here's the thing. If none of y'all understand how an axe in historical manufacturing is made, well, in truth, you got to, well, first wrap the said axe head around the shaft. Then it goes into the tapering form, as you see here. That's how it's supposed to be done. In truth, that's actually how you're supposed to make the axe. You don't just slather it on and think, oh, it's supposed to work this way. No. And here's a big problem with the said axe head of the double-headed variety. In truth, the manufacturing design of the double-headed axe didn't exist until the late 1800s. So why is it that people think that we can use a double-headed axe? Well, you can blame the same dumbasses who actually thought it'd be a good idea to put horns on a helmet. That's right, the Victorian theaters. Oh, you just gotta hate them, can't you? But now, in truth, I didn't want to actually say this out loud, but yeah, the double-headed axe head is the worst design you can ever go out there with. So in truth, we have to understand for this Friday fantasy video, any of y'all are in double-headed axes, switch it over to a regular axe head for your character. Now here you already, but Templar, it looks cool! Yeah, no it doesn't. In truth, it's not operational, it doesn't work, and here's the thing. You gotta use this weapon to survive. You've got to use it in an effective way. Even if you're super strong and such, say if like you're Hulk Hogan or, I want to say, Arnold Schwarzenegger, here's the thing. Here's the thing. I know one thing, Arnold Schwarzenegger cannot actually use two hands with a double-headed axe. He would have to worry about himself, especially if it comes back at him when he's doing, like something like this. Because look where my... Now let me put this actually with the axe head end. Because look, I had to go far back. And this degrades my power. This degrades my use of it. Meaning I don't actually have enough force for it. Because I had to put my hand all the way up here for it to be usable. And then I slide it down when it comes to the blow. I don't use it like that. Because look, my hand, it moves. My hand, it moves. Double-headed, I had to keep it away from this area so I can use it. Now don't get me wrong, I do love Gimli a lot because of the dwarves and such, but I rather prefer seeing a dwarven axe or any fantasy axe with a historical design. In fact, fantasy lovers, literally, there are hundreds of historical axe heads, that of which you can use for your historical your technically fantasy films. Or as well, I used to have a friend in high school who actually always did fantasy role-playing, especially Dungeons and Dragons, and he always chose the axe, which he didn't realize that there were better looking designs for axe heads out there, better than the double-headed, so he went over there to those especially. I guess you could count the halberd as an axe, but I really wouldn't go that far. But yeah. Anyways, guys, hopefully you liked this video. If you all want me to talk about anything fantasy-like, let me know down in the comments below. This could be Thanos' sword. This could be Thundercats. This could be anything Hobbit-related or something like that. Anyways, guys, hopefully you can actually catch me in the next fantasy video, and I'll be happy to actually talk about it. Anyways, guys, it's been Templar. Have a great day. Like and subscribe. Also, click the bell button for notifications. And as well, also check out our Facebook so that way you know which video is going to come up next. Anyways, guys, it's been Templar. Have a great day.